Hello everyone, it's Raza Van Werder from the University of Mother God Church. I hope that you all are having a wonderful Christmas season, and I wish you the best for the season, whatever religion you are and whatever you are celebrating, if anything. And I wish you a forthcoming wonderful, wonderful new year. And I hope that God gives you all the wonderful things that you wished for and that you hope for, and I hope that God gives you the grace to keep all the resolutions that you're going to make, if any. I'm going to make a few. All right. I am now reviewing all the things that I missed from the age of, since I could remember up until 16, bits and pieces of my childhood. I want to clean that up because some of the videos didn't come through, some of them were defected, some of them wouldn't upload, and so there's a lot of subjects that I missed that I want to talk about. And one is about me being a farm girl on the farm and what life was like on the farm. We moved to a farm in New Jersey, and my job was the chickens. So those were the only, the animals that I took care of were happy animals. The animals that I did not take care of were the less privileged animals, because they were under the power of other people who were, some of whom were a little bit wacky. Where's that part where I talk about Marius? Where is that? Where is that? There we go. There we go. I want to tell you one story about the farm. Marius Bernatas was the man who my mother had an affair with. We were in a Lithuanian community in Newark, New Jersey, and my father ran a school, and my mother produced local plays where all the kids had parts, that provincial, amateur stuff. And I always had a part, I was only 6 years old, but, we all had parts. And since my parents were active in the church, they got to get close and hobnob with the different people. So, of course, that meant trouble with my mother, because my mother was always having affairs with different guys. So I learned this much, much, much later as an adult. So I was told that my mother first had an affair with a young priest, and I remember him. He was handsome, he was young, he had black rimmed glasses, square, like sort of squarish, and I remember he was good looking. And then we had an organist, and he was good looking as well. I thought the organist was gay. I think, when I think back to it, I think he was maybe bisexual, and maybe he was friendly with the priest, or the priest was friendly and infatuated with the organist. Something went on. But my mother had an affair first with the priest, so I guess he must have been bisexual. This is what I'm told. This is what I'm told by a person who lived in that neighborhood, and I became friendly with this lady many, many years later, and she told me about it. She loved my father, this lady who told me this. She loved him. She was on his side. And then my mother had an affair with the organist. Now, then they decided, after the scandals of my mother's affairs and switching from the priest to the organist, they basically ran away. And my father got a loan from the old man priest, the little old man who had the cousin, supposedly lived with a cousin lady who, a lady housekeeper, a little old lady, not old, I mean he was like 60, and a little lady, and there were kids there, but they were the cousin's kids. See, that's the way it was in our communities. In the Lithuanian communities, a lot of times you'd have a straight hetero male with a lady that supposedly was his housekeeper but was his common law wife. They had children, and the children supposedly belonged to the cousins. You understand? So they lived in harmony and peace. They didn't abuse any altar boys. They didn't abuse any children. They didn't do anything evil. And that's the way the church should be. By the way, let me just say this. The church not allowing men to be married is stupid, ridiculous, wrong, illogical, and it makes no sense whatsoever. No sense, no sense. To be celibate is something that only certain people are called to do. Celibacy is extremely difficult, and I'm not going to say dangerous, but it's fraught with problems, serious problems, to be celibate. And not everyone can be celibate. I know. I was celibate, genuinely celibate for 30 years. I know what celibacy is. And priests should not be forced into celibacy because they're not going to keep it. They're going to be hypocrites. Any priest that can get a woman or another guy, if he's gay, they're going to do it. They're not going to be celibate. So it kind of encourages hypocrisy and a breaking of the rules, which must bear on their conscience and make them feel bad. So why does the Catholic Church impose this rule upon them? Because they're afraid, I heard this, that they're afraid that the priests will take resources and money from the church and give it to their wife and kids. Well, of course they are. They're working, aren't they? So some of that money belongs to them. I'm not saying all of it. Some of it belongs to them. So let them give it to their wife and kids. But so they've paid the price because so many homosexuals went into, and I'm not against homosexuality, but so many homosexuals and pedophiles went into the Catholic Church that it eventually caused a crisis. I'm someday going to tell you the story about the crisis because it was caused by my prayers, the so-called crisis. It's not a crisis, it's a revelation. It's a healing revelation is what it was, not a crisis for the children, crisis for the priests because they were caught, not a crisis for the children because they were saved. Okay, so that's a whole nother ballgame. So we went out into the country, and in the country, even before we got to the country, while we were still living in Newark, my mother got pregnant. And here there were two men in the house. My father and the organist moved in with us and paid rent for room and board and whatever. So my mother, that was her pattern. You know, she always had affairs. She had numerous abortions, whatever. So she got pregnant. And once she got pregnant, it was after that that we decided to move out into the country. There were a lot of problems with the pregnancy. Obviously, the conflict between my dad and this guy, and my uncle beat up the organist, Marius. And so now we're at the farm. That's what I'm trying to get to, and I had to give you all that preamble to explain. Now we're at the farm. My father is still in the city, supposedly going to come live with us, but he never did. So now we got Marius and me and us kids at the farm. Now, he did terrible things to the animals. There, we had a cat, Mitzi, and Mitzi was pregnant. You know, when a cat gets pregnant, her stomach sticks out. And I literally saw this man kick poor Mitzi right on her stomach where the babies were. And he almost killed her. But she went to the barn, and I nursed her. I gave her a box with a blanket, and I brought her milk and food every day. And she lay there in a box, recovering, and her babies were all born dead. That was Marius. The next thing I watched him do, and I don't know how much more else he did when I wasn't around, I dread to think. He had to bring the cow in from the field. We had a cow because my mother knew how to milk a cow and how to make the cheese, and we all knew how to make butter and all the things you make out of milk, you know, farmer cheese, regular cheese, you know, cottage cheese, yogurt, and butter, and, you know, all that. So we had a cow, and the cow would have to get pregnant in order to keep making milk, you see. So then they would, of course, take the baby away. You know, it's just horrible, horrible, ugly. Get a cow pregnant, have her get a baby, and then tear away the baby from her, and then use her milk. Why can't they just let the baby stay and drink some of the milk, and we take half, and the baby gets half? Why can't they do that? No, they can't, because they're too evil in patriarchy. So anyway, he had to bring in the cow from the field. So one day he came, you know, he had to bring the cow to the barn, and the cow didn't want to go, and the cow was being stubborn and slow, and he became enraged, and he began to beat the cow with the chain. He had her on a chain, and he took the chain somehow, or some chain or something, and he began to beat her, and I was horrified, and it got worse. He then picked up an iron bar and began to beat the cow right on top of where the baby was, her stomach. And I was just melting. I was just a kid. I was 9 years old, and this is a grown man, and I was just melting inside with fear and horror. And I remember hearing, I don't know what happened with the baby. I don't think the baby died. I don't remember. I don't know. But could have, probably not. But I remember I was in the house, and I could hear the car moo, 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 moaning and moaning and moaning. And nobody in the house cared except me. And I went to the barn, and he had her tied up so that she could only move like half a foot. And I tried to see what to do, like how to remove her from whatever she was attached to, and I couldn't figure out how. I was 8 or 9 years old, and I couldn't figure out how to untie it. But I brought her fruit. I brought her peaches, and that helped her a little bit. So that was the cruelty. They weren't only cruel to me and children that my mother aborted, 6 or 7 of them, which was using abortion as a form of birth control, which is wrong. But my mother was also cruel to animals, and he was as well, Marius. So this showed he had this anger against my mother's pregnancy, although he pretended to be in love with the baby, who he thought was his baby, and my father thought it might be his. They didn't know whose it was. There were no DNA tests. So it was very stressful at the farm, very stressful. To be continued.